All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. I appreciate your time here. I hope you're going to get a lot of value out of this afternoon. We're also being simulcast into Hall C, so hi to the folks down there if they can hear us, sat on the beanbags. And also hi to everyone watching this back. It wasn't the same without you here, but the guys in the room, say hello to everybody watching at home. Hello. Wow, cool. All right, so this is the session called Upgrade, Upgrade, Upgrade. Say goodbye to clean installs of Windows 10. So let me just tell you a quick bit about myself. My name's Chris Rhodes. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I work for a training company in the UK called IT Masterclasses. We deliver specialized training across a range of subjects. I'm also fortunate to be awarded the MVP award for the last few years for work that I do at home with the Windows user group in the UK. So we talk about a lot of topics like this. Back home, we do talks all over the country around IT professionals and their uses of Windows 10. So today, what are we looking at? We're going to be turning things on their head a little bit. I'm going to try and challenge some of your preconceptions about how you do things today, and hopefully give you some ideas about how you might do things differently with Windows 10. Because I think the technology has changed substantially to the point where we ought to be thinking a little bit differently. So I'm going to generalize a little bit here and there, because I have to. Let's talk about how we currently deploy Windows. Who's familiar with this concept of creating a gold image? Hands up. Almost everybody. OK, great. So this is my experience as well, going back pre-Windows 10, pre-Windows XP, I think even as well. My experiences of deploying operating systems was that you created this fantastic gold image. You know, you had everything inside there that you needed. In some cases, going back many years, you probably had several of these for different types of hardware. And now, in recent times, we've consolidated that because hardware doesn't matter as much. So we tend to have one image that we can deploy to lots and lots of computers. Device drivers helps us with that. And we'll often also incorporate, here we go, not just the operating system, but applications, device drivers, and any other settings that we want to deploy as well. This is the norm, I guess, it's fair to say. And people who have done deployments over the last 5 or 10 years will probably be nodding sagely, saying, yes, this is how things are done. We've perfected this, in fact. We've got some great tools. We've been doing this successfully for many years. Why change that? It works well for us. We have that polished. Well, let's think about that for a second. Because once you've got your gold image, what do you do with it next? Again, I'm generalizing a little bit, but this is traditionally how we would deploy a gold image. We'd usually use the wipe and load approach. Who's familiar with that term? Hands up. Yep, OK. OK, all of you. So wipe and load basically goes along these lines. You would take a computer, you want to put your new gold image on that you've spent hours and hours perfecting. You'd probably back up some user data off that machine first and deploy your image. And as part of that deployment of the image, we're usually wiping the hard drive, starting clean, getting rid of all the rubbish that was there before. And once our image is deployed, we might then add some applications and customize that a little bit. Perhaps we're using tools like Configuration Manager or Intune or other tools that might help us, or Group Policy, to put applications on there if they weren't part of that gold image in the first place, because every department needs different apps. And then finally, we might restore user data back onto that system. So any settings or user files that were there previously on the old system are now back again. So the user's quite happy. Their environment, although new, contains everything they had before. So does that sound familiar? Yes, OK. So I'm phrasing this as to how we used to deploy Windows. I want to kind of challenge that a little bit. Windows 10 is different. We do need to think differently about that as well. So the purpose of this diagram here is to show you. Ooh, that was interesting. What happened there? Oh, I pressed the wrong button.
Keep calm and use Procmon.
Ah. That never happened. Keep going. No. User error, user error. from current slide. There we go. That never happened. Erase that bit on the edits, OK? So the blue bars on this slide show us this is traditionally how we used to do things. Every time Microsoft brought out a new operating system, when they brought out Windows 7, we went and made a gold image, we deployed it. When Windows 8.1 came out, we did the same. And we spent quite a lot of time in each of those time periods getting that gold image ready, getting it deployed. But then what we found was we could sit back and relax a little bit. We only had to really worry about managing updates onto those images for the next couple of years. Life was good. And then Microsoft brought out Windows 10. And things were different. So as you probably know, Microsoft are not planning in the near future to bring out a Windows 11, or Windows 12, or a 13. Windows 10 is it. So what we have now is a completely different model. We're not going to get a new big build every 3 or 4 years. What we are going to get is incremental updates to our operating system. So it'll still be Windows 10 5 years from now, 10 years from now. The effort involved from your part then changes. You don't have that 3 or 4 year period where you can sit down and do nothing. You're kind of kept on your toes a little bit in keeping things up to date. So the work you're going to have to do changes. We're not going to create those monolithic gold builds every 4 years and then do nothing for 4 years. Well, not nothing. I'm sure you find other things to keep you busy. But this is a different way of doing things. This is how Microsoft want you to keep in line with Windows 10 releases. That does change things. So let's elaborate on that through these scenarios that I've got here. So for Windows 10, actually, just quick show of hands. Who's already deployed Windows 10? About half. OK, about half. Maybe a little bit more. All right. So for many of you, maybe you did the wipe and load approach to get there. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just trying to give you some alternatives. So let's think about those different scenarios. I could do an in-place upgrade. Now, I feel like I've probably got a target painted on my head when I say that, because normally, somebody suggesting doing an in-place upgrade of an older operating system would be laughed at. Well, I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say, no, do it. Because upgrades, in-place upgrades are supported. To be fair, they always have been, but the norm was not to do that. The norm was to do the wipe and load. What Microsoft are actually saying now is their deployment advice, not mine, their deployment advice is this is the recommended way to get from Windows 7 or Windows 8.1 to Windows 10. Do an in-place upgrade of your previous operating system. OK, we'll delve into that in a second. The second option we have here is an in-place, what I call an in-place update. In other words, you're topping up your Windows 10 build over those successive years after you first deploy it. You're keeping in line with feature updates. I'll talk more to those in a minute. So there's no need to create new builds every 6 months. You just keep refreshing your machines in place. And this is the recommended approach once Windows 10 has arrived onto a device, is to keep it up to date through these mechanisms. And the third one is provisioning, and I was talking to someone about this earlier. Provisioning is designed for several scenarios, really, but configuring brand new hardware is the most common scenario there. And what you're going to be able to do with that is take an existing Windows 10 machine. Perhaps you've just gone down to the shops and bought one off the shelf. It doesn't have your corporate image on there, but you know what? Do we need a corporate image? We just take what's given to us from the OEM build, perhaps, and we modify it. We provision our settings, our configuration, our applications through a provisioning package. We can do all kinds of things there. We can change the edition, the SKU of Windows. Maybe we go from Pro to Enterprise or Home to Enterprise. That was always a challenge. If somebody had bought a device and they say, hey, I've got this great device, I'm running Home Edition. I'd like to domain join that, please. No, sorry, that's not going to happen. Reinstall your machine. Well, no. We can just create a provisioning package and just modify that in situ. We'll be having a look at that in a bit more detail later on. So let's drill down on some of those in a bit more detail. Let's take that in-place upgrade first of all. Are you serious? Really? Chris, are you mad? No. I think you should try this. I'm not going to guarantee it's always going to work 100% of the time, but I firmly believe you should give this a go, because not only is it supported, but you've probably already done all the hard work. You just don't realize it. Was it painful, folks, moving from XP to Windows 7? Was there any pain involved in that? Yeah, okay. You've taken that hit. For most of you, that pain was probably around application compatibility. Is that fair? Well, you've done that work. You've got over that now. Most of the problems we had were moving from that previous generation of applications to newer operating systems that imposed new things like user account control. And so we've probably already done most of the work we need for that, if not all of it. Because actually, Windows 10, yes, we've got a support for UWP applications and side-loading of apps, modern apps, but actually the underlying application support for x86, x64 applications hasn't really changed that much. So if you already did that hard work before, well, actually now you're paying out on that. You should not have to reinvent the wheel on that one. So that should make life a lot simpler. And I know that from experience. People that we talk to at the user group, that when they go from 7 to 8.1 or 8.1 to 10, they tell us, yeah, that was, I'm not going to say easy, but that was a lot more straightforward than we thought it was because we didn't have any of those kinds of problems like moving from XP. So try it. There are a few gotchas, however. There are a few situations where that's not going to work, so let's be fair and call some of those out. Moving from a legacy BIOS to a UEFI configuration. Some people have a UEFI on their systems, but deliberately sort of disable that and put it in backward compatibility mode. Switching around also between 64 and 32-bit builds, that's not going to happen either. In-place upgrades don't like that. You can't go from a 32-bit build of Windows to a 64-bit Windows through an in-place upgrade. So you're still going to be in the wipe and load approach for that stuff. But aside those few, what I would like to think is a minority case of computers, you might actually be surprised that most of your computers will actually work this way. Of course, test it. Don't just go out and deploy it and say, hey, Chris said it would work. Of course, you want to test this out. OK. Once you've got Windows on the device, let's move on to that next silo, which was what I called in-place updates. You've deployed Windows 10. What next? Well, we're going to keep Windows 10 forever, in theory, but we're going to keep continually updating it through what Microsoft now call feature updates. Up until a few weeks ago, this was known as upgrades. And if you look in WSOS, they used to call it upgrades. It's now feature updates. So we're not talking about security fixes and those kinds of things. Those are what we call quality updates. Let's leave those to one side. We're talking about feature updates that will keep your computers current. And that's important for several reasons. One, just to keep abreast of the latest new features, to keep abreast of new support for applications and things like that, but also to ensure that you're allowed to keep applying quality updates to machines. We have a window of allowance for you to be out of line with that, but once you are beyond that, then quality updates stop coming down to your computer. So it's kind of important, for numerous reasons, that you do keep your machines up to date continually. And that's what we were talking about with the little green bars earlier on in that diagram. Those little updates that come out every once in a while, we keep refreshing those onto PCs. We can't just deploy Windows 10 and then say, that's it, we're done. OK, maybe with the exception of LTSB, but I don't want to talk too much about that. I've done a talk on that already this week. So we don't really need the wipe and load. Going forwards, this whole concept of building that gold image, redistributing it, shouldn't really need to do that for the bulk of computers. OK, new computers will arrive from time to time. How do we get those to where we want to to where we want them to be? Perhaps provisioning, we'll talk about that in a second. But for the majority of systems, once they're on the computer, we don't want to have to reinstall Windows, put the applications back on, put the user state back on, and be doing that a couple of times a year. That just sounds like too much work, too much pain. Keep it topped up in place. Now, there could be some blockers to that. So let's be realistic. What about if a vendor says, hey, we're not going to support our application on this new latest build. We'll only support it on this one that's a couple of months old. That could be important. You can't ignore that. However, I think in time, we'll be able to have that pressure wave of customers saying to the vendors, well, we can't go with you anymore because you're going to put us out of compliance with your application. If you're not going to support us, we have no choice but to find another product. So I think in time that will check itself, but for the short term, that could be a pain point. So you do need to look at that. However, I've put here 300 million people can't be wrong. Microsoft, of course, have already done lots and lots of updates, feature updates onto computers through Current Branch, through consumer PCs. So a lot of those pain points are already going to have been sorted out by the time you folks on Current Branch for Business, for example, are deploying those updates. I'm not saying that's a blanket 100% all the time, but most problems will have been dealt with either through people on Insider builds, on Current Branch builds, before they get to you. And if you're still not happy, you can still delay those builds for up to 6 months. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But the telemetry data is sort of in our favor here. Sure, you might have a custom app that nobody else uses, you developed yourself. We can't account for everything there. But the majority of applications, people would have already had some testing done on those, and there's time for you to get those fixes before rolling the build out. So let's take a look at servicing options, because although this isn't directly to do with deployment, it does tie in. You do need to know how to keep those machines current. So let's have a quick look. I mentioned Windows Insider builds. Don't really want to talk about those too much in a production environment because you shouldn't be using them. Current Branch, possibly. Some machines might be on Current Branch. That's sort of equivalent to what a home user might experience. But the majority of your systems are probably going to be Current Branch for Business. This is where you can control, either through the Settings app or more likely through group policy, when to deploy the quality and the feature updates. It gives you an opportunity to stagger that and not to have to deploy them immediately. So for example, you can defer feature updates for up to 6 months on a Current Branch for Business build. So you do have some time to remediate. And given that you're not building gold images anymore, you can spend the time on that. Long-term servicing branch, I don't really want to talk too much about that. It's a minority use case. It's like less than 5% of systems. Come and talk to me later if you want to know more about that. But I'm assuming for the purposes of the rest of this that majority of us here on the majority of machines will be using Current Branch for Business. That's the servicing model I kind of expect corporates to go for, where they can control the release of those updates either by using Windows Update for Business, where your computers go to the internet for the updates, albeit with deferrals built into that, or more likely for most of you here, I'd expect WSUS, SCCM, possibly Intune, as 3 other ways in which you can control updates and exactly when they get released to which computers, and that also buys you time to test and roll those out incrementally to test groups first to minimize the risk. Okay. So let's move on to that third scenario, which was provisioning. This is a new area. We didn't have tools like this previously, so let's introduce them. With provisioning, you're going to create provisioning packages. These have a ppkg file extension, which we're going to have a look at in a second. And we tend to use this in certain situations. I mentioned this scenario of somebody buying a computer from a shop, bringing it into the office and saying, hey, make that work. That's definitely in scope here. But I wouldn't tend to expect that's going to be used too much for bigger environments where you're deploying with task sequences. So things like SCCM task sequences, you're probably going to be deploying a build originally with that. So that might be your gold build. But then once you've got it out there, SCCM can cover all the changes you need from that point onwards, like applications, configuration settings, compliance settings. You're kind of in the best place with Intune or SCCM for that. So the typical scenarios I expect you guys to use that for is bring your own device and choose your own device scenarios. Bring your own device, of course, is where people bring their own computers in, and they could be running all manner of things. They could be running Windows Home Edition on that, and that's never going to directly be able to join your domain. Choose your own device. People go out and buy their own kit on behalf of the company. It's still company-owned, but the company doesn't necessarily go out and purchase it. We can also use these provisioning packages with a WIM file as well. So if you're going down the route of building images, then these are compatible with those too. The packages themselves, which we're going to look at in just a second, are actually quite small. They're easy to deploy. I'm going to build one in a second with you. It's going to come out less than 10 kilobytes. Okay, and that will include a certificate as well. They can be a bit bigger. It depends on what you put in your package. For example, we can deploy applications alongside as well. That could be a universal Windows platform app, a modern app, or it could be one of your classic x86 apps. We can bundle those in a provisioning package as well. So we're modifying not just Windows, but actually the applications on that system too. So we're going to be using this tool called Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer, or the ICD tool. Can I just have a quick show of hands? Who's seen that before? Oh, who's used that before? Okay, about 20% of you? Okay. So we're going to dive into that in a second. This is not the same as MDT. If you're thinking, I've never seen this before, how is that different to MDT? I've done task sequences before, I've deployed images before with MDT. Is this the same thing? It's not. It's a different tool for a different scenario. We do cover quite a lot of areas, but nowhere near as much as a task sequence would in MDT. But remember, we're not deploying whole images here. We're taking a Windows installation and we're modifying it in situ. MDT is great when you're deploying a fresh operating system for that wipe and load scenario. But that's not what we're doing here. So we don't touch quite the same areas. It's not a feature like for like with MDT, if that's what you're wondering. So what we're going to have a look at next is a demo of ICD to show you how it works. Just while I'm setting this up, you can get this tool for free. This is part of the Windows ADK, the Automated Deployment Kit for Windows 10. It's part of that, okay? It's a free download. Let's have a look at it. Here we are. So I've loaded up the ICD here. And on the start page, there are several different situations it caters for, such as simple provisioning. If you just wanted to take a machine and have it join a school or a work network, you can go through simple provisioning. But let's go advanced. You create a project with this and save it in. Here's one I made earlier to save that I've called Ignite Demo. Now, when you go and open a new project, I've gone and shown all the possible options here, but you can actually trim it down and say, let's just have a look at the common IT Pro settings that we're likely to want to deploy onto Windows computers and select from there. Well, I've gone for all so you can see everything. And I'm going to pick up on just two areas that I'm going to deploy settings for here. Notice that you can do things like edition upgrades, which will be very attractive for people with that BYOD, CYOD scenario where the user's brought the wrong edition of Windows into the network. We can change that, so we can take your home edition, we can make it enterprise, for example, by adding a product key here. Very simple switch. But we're not going to do that. We're going to build a certificate onto our machine. I'm perhaps thinking here that the Windows 10 device might operate on a Wi-Fi network. The Wi-Fi network might be using certificate-based authentication, or I might be connecting to a VPN that needs that as well. So I'm going to actually push out a certificate through this package onto the device so it's ready to connect to those networks. So I've gone down to certificates. I've created a new certificate. I've already put this in here just to save typing. And I've called this certificate name Contoso Root CA Cert, because I've got a certificate authority called Contoso CA. And what I've already done to save time is I've taken a copy of the root certificate there. So this is very common if you set up your own PKI at work. This is a very common thing to need to do, is to get that root certificate onto the device so that you can therefore start trusting other certificates that computer encounters, such as service certificates for authentication. So I want to deploy the root CA certificate onto the devices. I just give it a name here and point it to the exported file that I've taken from my root CA. I can walk you through this later if you want to know. So I've pointed it to a file location. This could be a network path. Just for simplicity, I've saved this onto my desktop. I wouldn't normally do that, but just for this demo, I've put it on my desktop. That's a file that exists on there. And I've also decided in here to build a VPN setting as well. It says, trying to find it, connections, there we go, connection profiles, in fact. So you'll notice there's things like Wi-Fi connections, but I'm going to build a VPN connection that I wish to deploy to the devices, giving it a name called Corp VPN. And I can go ahead and change all the settings around the behavior of that VPN, the settings for it. So what type of protocol are we using? What type of user authentication do we use for that? And also, of course, things like the server name. So to save time, I've already pre-filled that information in here. You'll see that some of these fields are required, some are not. So I've made sure that I've filled out everything that is required with a value. So in this case, I'm using a native VPN, not a third-party one. But we could select the VPN protocol type, like so. And then when we're done, we save the project, because we might want to go back and edit it later, and then ultimately export that. And when you export that, that creates the package, that PPKG file. So let's go and export it. If you want to digitally sign it for assurance for the end user, you can do so, but for time reasons, I'm going to skip that. Just like signing a driver or signing any other package digitally. And we'll just output that into my folder. So you'll see it doesn't actually take that long. Done. And if we look at how much space that actually consumed there, the two files that comprise that package there, less than 8K. And I've also got my certificate in there as well, which is only less than 1K as well. So less than 10K for that whole bunch of settings. Now, that was only two things, to be fair, but most of this is just text that's going into this file, so the file is always reasonably small. So should we deploy it? Of course we should. All right. So back in the Settings app, I'm pretending now that I've gone to a user PC, a user device, and that I've also put that package on a memory stick. So I've got that on my memory stick here. I've selected in the Settings app, add a package. Where's it from? Removable media is the default. And if we just select that, go ahead and add it, we just get asked, is this OK to do this? And it's saying, is this from a source you trust? Remember, we didn't digitally sign that, so it is coming up with that warning to say, do you really want to do this? Of course, we'll say yes. But it actually tells us up front what the package is going to do. It's going to add a certificate, and it's going to change my network connectivity settings. So I already know up front what the modifications will be. All right, I may not know exactly what the VPN settings are, but I know it's going to change something to do with my networks. So yep, let's go ahead and do that. Before we do, I almost forgot. Let's have a look at my certificates list before we do this. So in my certificates console, Trusted Root Certification Authorities already contains a bunch of CAs in there. All right, but what we're going to do is add a new one with this package. Go away, Alfred. I can see you finished work. All right. Some of us are still working. And there it is. See, Contoso CA is now added, which was fairly painless, I think you'll find, wasn't it? That wasn't too difficult. But our VPN would have also been added as well. So that's fairly simple. Yes, I've involved the end user a little bit there, but that's something I can easily email out to them, put on a pen drive in the post. It's a quick and easy thing. And look how fast it was. I didn't even need to reboot the system there. You might do, depending on what else you put in the package, though. If you're changing something like the install SKU, expect a reboot for that to take effect. But for many things, it just takes effect on the fly. So that was a lot quicker than putting out a new image, wasn't it? I've just changed my install copy of Windows in place. OK. So hopefully you've seen, just from that demo only, why wipe and load doesn't always make sense if I want to add an extra word in here. Sometimes it does. You've still got to get an operating system out there in the first place. Maybe wipe and load in some scenarios is still good. But for some occasions, look at how fast that provisioning package installed onto the computer, and it didn't take us more than 5 minutes to create it either. That's a heck of a lot quicker than building a task sequence, building an image, inserting the drivers to it. The device here might have already had some OEM drivers on board. I don't need to touch that. It's already working from when it came out of its box. So I don't want to touch that and have to incorporate the third-party drivers into a big image. All I need to do is just modify the things that were of interest to us as a company. We could do other things like join Azure Active Directory or join a domain. We could do those kinds of things in there as well. So don't forget, it is still a valid approach. I'm not saying never do wipe and load. There are times where that does make sense. But let's look at feature updates. Let's look at how we do the servicing. Your servicing model that you select is really important. How you continuously update Windows as a service from now on is something you've got to give consideration to before you start this journey. Okay? Because once you've put Windows onto the device, that's not it. You can't just sit back and do nothing. We've got to keep those feature updates coming unless we're running a long-term servicing branch, of course. So you do need to tie in with the servicing models. Your choice of tool, don't forget, SCCM, WSUS, Windows Update for Business if you're going to the web. But you've got to think about how we refresh our devices. I've assumed here that we're using CBB. That's the norm. That's the kind of straight and narrow for typical corporate computers. Again, you could be using long-term servicing branch. Come and talk to me later if you want to know more about that. But do you really want to keep building images? I don't want to put anyone here out of a job, but I'm trying to make your life easier. It's not necessarily the go-to decision that it would have been in past generations. Maybe you just build one to get it out there because that's more convenient, but afterwards, I don't want you making new builds every few months. Having said that, Microsoft do put out builds every so often. We've just recently had build 1607. Maybe now and again you choose to, every year or so, go and make a build that incorporates all of the updates in one go. So if you do have a brand new device or you have to, a faulty hard drive and you have to replace a hard drive, sometimes wipe and load is still valid and you do want to keep images on hand for those situations, but for most of the time, topping up is the name of the game. So let me leave you with some thoughts on this for my calls to action. Review the scenarios that apply. We've talked about in-place upgrades, in-place updates, and provisioning. All of those might apply for different machines. You don't have to take a blanket approach that all computers have to have their hard drives wiped every year, every couple of years. We're now in that situation where Microsoft have kind of got this pretty well down to a T of delivering updates and still keep machines working without breaking apps, without erasing user data. That process works. People were skeptical about that. But the overwhelming amount of data says that that works. 300 million computers can't be wrong. Okay, yeah, there's going to be the occasional bump, but overwhelmingly, in-place upgrade as a mechanism does work. I remember almost biting my nails when it went RTM and millions of people started downloading it. I thought, hang on, we're going to see some bad news headlines the next day. It was all fine. A couple of bumps, but predominantly, the experience is good. It does work. Now, of course, you need to test that. Don't just take my word for it. I don't know what apps and devices and drivers you guys have, but try this out. Don't assume that the gold build is the way forwards. Also, look into those blockers that we talked about. I was having some good conversations with people this week about challenges that they've got with this. Application vendor support is a big one for some people. You've got to identify those. Because down the journey of Windows 10, which don't forget, we're on that journey now. It's kind of like a merry-go-round. Once you step on, you can't really get off. It's constantly going around and around. So you've got to make sure that your vendors are with you on that as well. And if they're not, then we have to have conversations with them about how they're going to help us on that journey, because we are stuck on that loop now of continuous updates. We can't jump off. It's not simple for us to say, well, that's it then. Vendor's not supporting this application, so we'll jump off of that ring. You can't really do that. You can do it for a few months, but the ride continues. You've got to stay on it, okay? So you've got to make sure they're in on that process with you, or look for alternatives. Find those blockers, in other words. As a piece of advice also, look into build rings. Just like Microsoft release builds in different rings, you can do the same. You can use WSUS, you can use SCCM, you can use Intune for this to create different computer groups that you deploy to. So we don't have to deploy all new feature updates to all computers all at once. Have a test group of computers that you deploy to first to ensure it all works. After you've done your initial testing, put it out to that pilot group, and then gradually expand that group outwards so it covers all of your computers, but you can do that over a period of time. So you might have different stages of that, say immediate deployment, 1 month, -1 month, -3 months, -6 months, to give you the option of greater testing and to reduce risk. So I'd still keep on that journey, but just put in place a few checks for yourselves to give you a back-out option. That you don't want to deploy the same updates to all computers all at once. Sometimes you hit glitches where there's a departmental application that just doesn't work properly. You need to buy yourselves time to do that. So creating deployment rings, I think, makes sense. OK, so we've got a few minutes left for questions. There are some mics dotted about, so feel free to jump up. Yep.
Maybe they work. OK, there we go. My question is, the ICD configuration designer, does that support configuring a config manager client or installing that? And as an alternative, if the answer to that question is no, can you script the install of those PPKGs so that I could have a master installer that would do both of those things?
Yes to both questions. So you could incorporate a classic application, as we now call them, which could be the MSI for System Center client.
OK.
You could do that for sure. And then once that's under the control of System Center, then you can do everything else from there, can't you? So any other applications, configuration settings, you can deploy through Configuration Manager once it's on there. So yes, you can deploy apps, which could be the System Center app, but also you could use a provisioning package at the time of installation with a WIM as well. So sort of a yes to both questions, hopefully there.
Okay.
All right, good. Yep.
I work for a university, and our biggest issue has been that we were on Windows 7 Enterprise, and there's not a supported upgrade to Windows 10 Education.
Oh, yeah.
Is upgrading it to Windows 10 Enterprise and then possibly using the provisioning to change that to Education a good idea, bad idea?
Ooh, you got me there. I don't think we can do that one because Education's a different SKU. We can move between SKUs, but it's really meant for like going from Pro to Enterprise or Home. I don't think we can move to Education. See me at the end, and I'll double check on that.
Okay.
But I don't think we can do that one. I don't remember that as a route. Yeah.
Hello. Could you use the ICD tool to convert LTSB to CBB?
Yeah. Can we use the tool of ICD? Sorry about the acronyms. To move between an LTSB to a CBB? Not really. It's a reinstall on that one.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry about that. Yeah. LTSB is a whole different version of Windows in effect. So we should, when we're doing that deployment of that one, it's always a clean install for that one, I'm afraid. There's no easy way to hop between those deployment models. The only way you can easily hop is from current branch to current branch for business or back again. That's just some group policy settings. But LTSB is a whole different SKU that you have to install. It's a different product. So no, sorry.
Hello.
Hi.
When using Wicked for provisioning, if the vendor has, say, Symantec or McAfee, is there a way to remove that software? Or is there just the assumption
can we
that...
remove software? I don't think so. I don't remember seeing anything in there for removal, unless you created an application package that actually did the removal.
Okay.
But I don't think there's a remove option with that.
And then use Wicked to use the application package?
Yeah, you could use Wicked to deploy a new app that removed it, but I don't think there's a way to natively. I'd have to check, but I don't remember seeing that in there for removal.
Okay.
Okay. No.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi.
Go ahead. Hi.
If we're doing an in-place task sequence upgrade, is there a way to remove the consumer experience type apps that come down if you just do a straight WIM?
Right, the consumer apps. Yes, so this is a question that's come up about 5 times this week, actually, in different sessions. So you're talking about things like the Xbox app. You want to get rid of those because quite often what you find is the feature updates put them back on again.
Exactly.
So what most folks are doing here is creating scripts that get rid of them, that identify them and get rid of them, because every new feature upgrade essentially puts them back on again. So the kind of quickest workaround I've come across so far is to create scripts that identify those and then just take them off again. Or you could use App Blocker to identify those apps as well and block them. So if you're using Enterprise, that is, App Blocker and group policy will allow you to just keep them on the system in effect, but just prevent the user from running them.
Okay.
You can also use customized start menus as well, so you don't have to show the application icon on the desktop either.
Thank you.
Okay?
So Microsoft has changed, almost like with each version of Windows 10, the registry key that designates current branch for business, and all this. It used to be one registry key, and then they changed it the next window. How do we keep up with that? One, how do you know when they change it? How do you supposed to get out there at thousands of machines and change the registry setting on that so that it does? Problem we had was with the new release of Windows, the Anniversary Edition, I guess the registry key had changed from where we had originally rolled it out.
Okay.
So they no longer were current branch for business. So as soon as it came down the pipe, they started all updating themselves to the anniversary edition, which broke everything because the display link driver in the anniversary edition is broken.
Okay.
How do we keep up with this? And how do we know when they change it? And
Yeah, that's a good question. So my advice to you is get at least a few machines on the Insider build.
we have some. And
Yeah.
they didn't have a problem with the Insider
Oh,
edition.
okay. I do know what you mean about display link because I've had the same problem myself personally, so I can feel your pain. I would always try and get, in a big IT shop, get a few computers on the Insider builds, get some on fast ring, some on slow ring, so that you can try and anticipate that before those builds come through to current branch and then ultimately current branch for
How do we
business.
keep the registry setting up to date so that the current branch for business PCs are always current branch for business? It's like Microsoft is changing this.
They
almost
have
to defeat
changed,
us.
they have improved the
But the
setting.
key changes.
They've changed it, yes. So customer feedback was from 1511, Bill 1511, that they wanted to have more depth of control over deferrals specifically. So they actually changed the group policy settings around that, which means different keys.
And then you got to go get a new ADM file to put out there, correct?
Yep, correct. So, well, no, you don't have to get a new file. You can just use a newer build of Windows 10 to edit your group policies
But
on your
we
domain
do our
controller
group
with that.
policies from the server, not from the workstations.
Right, but it depends where you're editing it from. So if you're editing it from a 1607 machine, the group policies that are on your domain will light up with those new settings. It's just really about where you're running the tool from. But yeah, they changed that. The changes are actually pretty good. I can talk to you offline about this. But the changes are good for IT people because it gives you more control. That's what people have been asking for. They don't just want to say defer updates. They want to say, for these type of updates, defer them this long. For quality updates, defer them
Well,
defer them
we'd like
less.
to control them through System Center, but apparently you have to still make that registry setting on the computer so they know which group they're in.
Oh, I get you. Well, you've got System Center. You can deploy reg keys from System Center anyway. But no, the question is, how do I keep up to date with that? So my
Right.
advice is, get some Insider builds on there just for testing, to see what's coming down the line, to try and anticipate those things. That way you're
Are
all
they
ahead of the curve.
announcing- Like, did they announce somewhere along the line that, hey, we're moving this registry from here to here so that you would know to change it
I
before it
don't
happened?
remember seeing that, but I know there was a lot of talk about the new changes via
Right.
group
So
policy.
my question, how does the system administrators know how to keep up with these changes because they're not publishing them
How do you
to
keep up
us?
to come to Ignite every year? That's the answer.
Okay.
And on that note, I'll take other questions offline, but guys, we're pretty much out of time here. Thank you so much for your time and your questions. I'll see you on the deployment booth downstairs if you have any more. Thank you.